It's with great pleasure that I introduce Professor Alta Schutte, who is President of the International Society of Hypertension, or ISH. And so today Alta will be giving us an update on the ISH activities and how we can engage with the society. So thank you, Alta.
Thank you very much, Quinn, and for Dean and everyone who invited me. It's for me a great pleasure to actually speak to you today. It will be informal, so absolutely I'm welcoming any questions and further engagement. I think that's what being a society is all about, is engagement with its members. So first of all, I'm very delighted also to be in Australia for 3 months now. So I was in South Africa for about 20 years working in the field of hypertension, and now moved to the University of New South Wales and the George Institute. So also joined the High Blood Pressure Research Council. So I'm delighted to be part of this community as well, and looking forward to many further engagements. So I was asked to give you some highlights on how I think it would be good to engage with the society for scientists or clinicians working here in Australia, and also to update you briefly on the latest of the ISH activities. I thought maybe good to highlight some recent ones. You will certainly be familiar with most, but let me just have a brief overview of that. I think one of the most significant activities the society is known for is, of course, May Measurement Month.
Oh, sorry, it's not on Presenter View.
Is it not?
Yes.
Sorry, I have 2 screens, so it's sometimes. Now?
That's right, thank you.
Okay, good. So I think what is important is the May Measurement Month initiative has been there for quite some time. This year it was, of course, moved to 2021, unfortunately not able to take place due to the pandemic, but it's been very active, and I think we had great engagement also from Australia for this. Resulting in several publications, not only for the main study, but also for the different smaller country-specific studies in European Heart Journal supplements. And this is an initiative we plan to continue for as long as we are able to do that with funding. So that is absolutely one way where we would welcome further engagement from scientists and people here in Australia. And then, as you have mentioned earlier, we have released the ISH guidelines yesterday officially, and that was by 2 publications simultaneously in the Journal of Hypertension, which is the official journal of the society, as well as in Hypertension, with accompanying editorials. They are open access, so please feel free to download yourself some copies of those. I'm not going to give a full presentation on it, but I would suggest you go just to the ISH website. There's a specific link on the opening page to the guidelines. There's a whole webinar on it for an hour or so for all of the different authors presenting on sections of the guidelines, highlighting what's new. And there's also the links to the papers if you are interested to the papers or to the editorials that accompany them. Just very briefly on what is quite different from our guidelines is that you will all be aware of the fact that several countries released guidelines for the past few years. So one could typically ask, why would another set of guidelines be required? The American guidelines appeared in 2017, followed by the Europeans in 2018, the NICE guidelines in the UK and in Japan also last year. So, but it's quite clear also when you just look at this graph, which actually presents age-standardized systolic blood pressures from around the world, that those countries all have some of the lowest blood pressures. And it's actually the low and middle-income countries that's in orange and green and red that sometimes actually require more intervention to manage hypertension. And they don't actually develop their own guidelines, but often adopt those from high-income countries. But the guidelines from high-income countries are typically not developed for low-income regions or low-resource settings, taking into account, for example, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, etc., which is not normally an easy aspect to include in low and middle-income regions. So also when taking into account the distribution of where are the most people with raised blood pressure, more than 1 billion of the 1.4 billion, as estimated in 2010, reside in those regions. So we therefore try to address this discrepancy by aligning with the mission of the society, which is to reduce the global burden of raised blood pressure, and thus developed the guidelines. What we did was specifically, and I think this is what distinguishes the guidelines from most others that exist, is to develop these essential and optimal standards of care. So essential standards are minimum standards, and I think that is what we're trying to say. It doesn't matter which country you live. These are the minimum standards that's required in order to actually be able to manage blood pressure and hypertension. The optimal standards of care are typically those that's articulated already in those from high income regions. So we actually included both of those. We did not review all evidence again. It was done extensively. So what we did was we reviewed also, we did review it, but not on an extensive level as was done, for example, in the ESC guidelines. So throughout the document, and as an example here, you will see the green sections, which is essential, and the optimal sections, which is, of course, the ideal way to manage hypertension. And as for example, this is the treatment algorithm on the right-hand side. This is what we would ideally would like to have. But in essential settings, for example, there are typically not single pill combination therapy available everywhere, or all these different types of drugs. It depends on what's available, what the costs are. And in some instances, we would say use whatever drugs are available with as many of the ideal characteristics as possible, for example. That is in another table listed. So this is just an example of how we actually constructed the guidelines. Other activities of personal interest is also, we try to ensure that there are more free online courses available on how to manage hypertension. And that is, again, with my background coming from low middle income country, there's a real need to better manage and detect raised blood pressure. And therefore, for example, this is one that we've now added to our website. Is we work with Johns Hopkins School of Public Health together with Resolve to Save Lives. I developed an online course which is free. I think, yeah, I'm not sure if you will be able to see, but I'm not going to show the whole thing. It's just a few minutes, but I'll just show the start of it. So it's in very simple terms actually describe okay, so that's just to give you an idea. It's all of them are freely on our website and also on Johns Hopkins website. So yes, I think that will hopefully also help to raise the quality of management of hypertension in all regions. I think also in terms of the question of how to better engage with the society, it's a good idea to have an idea of how the committee structure of the society is looking. So here we have also from our website all the different committees and what they do. For example, an awards committee, a communications committee, corporate liaison. And then we have all these different regions in the world. We have chairs and activities for each of these regions. This is typically also done through May Measurement Month that we engage with these different regions. It's at the bottom here. And then we also have scientific program committees, membership committees, etc. And it's sometimes, if something resonates with an individual, I would always recommend get in touch with the chair. It's all on the website who the chairs of these committees are, and we are generally quite open to anyone who wants to volunteer, to be involved. That's absolutely not a problem. Another activity that's also new and is soon to be implemented is the new ISH Fellows. So that is typically as FESC or FAHA, that is very well known. We didn't want to go for a fish FISH, so we made it an ISHF. But that is also a symbol of excellence, and we have had lots of applications for this, which were great. So that will be also later on this year, we will announce that. So to be elected, it recognizes and honors the members of the society that really distinguish themselves through their excellence. So that is something that we also wish to implement this year. Then I always say, if you want to become more engaged with the society, a good starting point is to attend the meetings if at all possible. That's where we meet each other, and if you go there regularly, it's a good place to see others again and to keep those networks open. Our next meeting is, of course, now postponed to next year, still in Glasgow, so the details are also there on the website, and several activities are already being planned. It's also, as I said, when you work with a society, it's volunteer work, as we are doing now. I'm sure you are doing volunteer work now, Quinn, as well. So that is the thing. It's time you take off from your usual activities, but not necessarily expect something in return. But I think the networking is something that you can't really put in numbers, and in the long term, it really strengthens your overall scientific standing and links with groups around the world. And I think even when you start projects, it also helps significantly, in my opinion, or in my experience. Other specific opportunities are, and that is some of the networks and some of the committees. You are all familiar with the New Investigator Network. Many of you have been involved there, played prominent roles already. We have also the mentorship scheme. Many of you have been involved also as mentees or mentors. I think the Australians in the ISH have actually made such huge contributions to several ISH activities, which is brilliant. We also have the Women in Hypertension Research Network, which really wasn't that active in the past year or two, but I think now things are really changing, and there we also want to build a much broader network than just having a committee. It's not only for women, it's also about research on cardiovascular disease in women, so it's welcome for all who are interested in this research area. And Musha Stekkelings from Denmark is the chair of this committee. As I said, if there's any activity where anyone would like to become more involved in, it can just be contacting the secretariat or the chairs of those committees. Awards and prizes, it's always nice to get an award. So we often circulate, we often circulate advertisements where we actually invite people to nominate candidates for our awards. It's usually bestowed at our meeting, so it will be in Glasgow next year. So please do that, nominate your colleagues, and that's good to actually also get recognition that way. And then social media and media. The ISH is quite active through several social media channels. Anastasia, which is also at the High Blood Pressure Research Council, is very active and supportive also of the ISH Twitter account and several others. So engaging there is one place to be seen and to become more involved as well. And then we have, of course, our communication is also quite prominent in our newsletter, which is the editor is Professor Lars Lindholm from Sweden, and I think our newsletter is really going from strength to strength. There's some really good papers in there, and so read through that. If you have any comments, let me know, let the editor know. Any activity or engagement is very welcome. I think that's where I'm going to end it. So go to the website, read our documents, newsletters, bulletins, and don't be afraid to get in touch. I think we are very open for any ideas. And there's my contact details if anyone wants to send something to me. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you, Alta. That was very informative. So we'll have some time for questions now. So you could write your questions in the chat. So we have one question from Jun. How does one develop an education course that can be accredited / endorsed by ISH? Example, on the diagnosis and management of primary aldosteronism. I don't think there is an ISH course on this topic.
No, there isn't. I think what's important is when you want something to be endorsed by the society, we actually welcome engagement at a very early stage of that, so that some of the council can also be involved with the strategic planning of that. In the last 2 years, we had many emails and submissions for endorsement by the society. So we actually developed on our website also a link to what is the process for ISH to endorse a course or any other thing like a meeting or a paper or anything. And therefore we suggest ISH involvement from the beginning. And when the in this case, a course is already prepared, it is submitted to the society where we have a research, science and education committee.
ビデオの左にミュートっていうのがないですか?
And the committee then reviews it and can advise on whether we wish to endorse it or not. But since we were inundated with so many, we came to that suggestion that we want to be engaged from the beginning, because often there are specific things that we feel is amiss, and it's better when it's also from the society itself when it's endorsed. So there's critical involvement.
Alta, are there specific members of the society who are sort of in charge of this course development, or we just reach out to someone within the committee who might have an interest in that area?
Yes, the committee, I think it's best to actually engage with the chair of the committee, which is Claudio Borghi from Italy. He's the chair, but there are also several other members. You can see them on the website very easily, and engaging any of them would be fine.
Hideki, did you have a question there for Alta? Okay. Does anyone have any other questions, or I might ask one? I was just wondering, like, what are the future plans for the May Measurement Month? Because it's creating a lot of awareness now of high blood pressure, and it's identifying potential people who have untreated hypertension. But is there any follow-up with those patients, like if they are actually going to the GP, getting it checked out, or like, are there any strategies that ISH plan to implement to?
Yeah, that's a good question. In 2019, we started to use the UK as a pilot to actually do some sort of a follow-up to see those who have been screened, what happened to them. So that's still ongoing. I actually should, it's just Neil who actually initiated that within the UK. We have tried some funding application, actually just one so far, to actually find research funding, because you need some funds to actually be able to do that appropriately. And there's been, for example, a study in China that showed that the screening program actually resulted in a significant reduction in blood pressure just 2 years later in the same population based on the screening. So at least there's good signs that the screening will have that wider impact. But I think May Measurement Month is ideally suited to actually explore that much further. The idea for the campaign, because that's actually what it is not a research project, but it's become a little bit of it, is to continue for as long as we are able to do that. In the first stages, the society investigated significant funding in it, but at the moment it's externally funded. We cannot continue from within the society. It is expensive in one sense, but when you think of the global scale, it's actually cheap per individual being screened. So at the moment, we are mainly supported with Servier funding, as well as Omron, who is sponsoring all the blood pressure devices. So as they have actually committed to continue until, I think, for another 3 years. So as long as we get external funding, it will continue, and we will continue to explore other options to expand it wherever possible, also in terms of whether follow-up of patients actually result in reduced blood pressures.
That's great to hear.
Alta, I've got a question. In the low-income countries, obviously there's a whole combination of factors, you know, awareness, personnel. Is there one major one that stands out, or are they all of equal importance?
In terms of May Measurement Month?
Well, no, I mean, in the problem of treating hypertension, blood pressure, high blood pressure, is there a group of factors that stand out, or is it across the board problematic?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. In some countries that have previously been low middle income, like China, which is now absolutely on the upper trajectory, it's improving quite a bit. But if you think of countries such as in Africa, especially, I think Africa is highlighted all the time as, you know, there is simply awareness is appallingly low. And that's why screening campaigns, especially from African countries, every time in May Measurement Month, we report for the total of about 1.5 million in each year, 30% have never had their blood pressures taken before in their lives. And that is typically from some of those low middle income countries. So African region, but also other areas in India, The Philippines have been massively involved, and we actually saw there a lot of problems. But it's very country specific. Each country clearly have their own issues, and therefore I think engaging with the departments of health would obviously be the best way to go. But you know, for a charity society like ours, it's not always that easy to do. We do what we can, and if there's better ways to do it, we partner with, for example, the WHO or others.
Is there any other questions? Yes, I'll ask another one then. I guess with the current pandemic, because like it's very hard for people to get together, especially like for a conference. Are there any future activities planned for maybe later in the year, like for ISH members to potentially network with each other or anything like that?
Well, at the moment, as we had to have our general member meeting in Glasgow in May, this is not continuing. So we are planning our general meeting to take place also on an online webinar in October. That is not ideal. I like face-to-face meetings for such meetings, but we don't want to postpone it until April next year. So that's when my term will also end as president, and then Maciej Tomaszewski will take over in October. So that is at this stage the only one that I think the engagement in terms of media with the release of the guidelines and the webinar links also on our website is probably the most recent, but there may be others in the pipeline. I'm not sure. As I said, there are several activities being planned for both the women in hypertension group as well as some of the new investigator and mentorship activities. So not the specific ones that I'm aware of, but it's highly possible.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I have a question. Hi, thanks Alta. I'm just curious, for more than 30 years now we've been measuring blood pressure, but we're not, although we're increasing awareness, we're really not impacting the control rate. What's the view of ISH for vascular or arterial stiffness and moving into that space? Because I know there's a lot of research which is confirming it, but I'm not sure how we're doing globally in accepting it.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm also a strong supporter of arterial stiffness because I think there's a lot of potential, but I can be honestly say when we discussed that in the guideline session, it was expressed by many that it's not a high priority. And because we lack still some critical evidence in terms of outcome and many trials to support that, we need to know how to actually therapeutically improve it in order for it to be regarded. So there were many of those considerations. So I think over time, as more evidence is generated, that it will become a higher priority. But at this stage, we still are not there yet. But I fully agree with you that I think even if you think in terms of blood pressure measurements, even in our guidelines, we recommend the methods that have been used for 100 years already. But the thing is, we all have to think in terms of device availability in low resource settings and what is practically also possible. So it's a lot of considerations.
Do we have any other questions?
Can I ask another question?
Yep, go ahead.
I was just wondering, with the May measurement month, are the questions set in stone, or is there a chance to modify the questions over time? For example, to capture an understanding of the population awareness of hypertension and the damage that's potentially caused by hypertension. So I think a lot of patients, they just feel no symptoms from high blood pressure, and so to them, there's no urgency for treatment. Do they know that it can lead to strokes or heart failure and so on and so forth? Is it an opportunity to test a lot of people all at once just by simply asking a few questions at the time of measuring their blood pressure?
Yeah, every year so far, the questions have differed a little bit. So we amended slightly, but at the same time, Neil Poulter is chairing, it is very sensitive in making the questionnaire too long. So we have to have it super simple so that it can easily also be translated. And then there's always the encouragement, if you want to add an additional, for example, a more detailed questionnaire, that it can be done on a local level in specific countries if it goes through the normal ethics, etc. But if there are specific questions for the global one, and it's just one, probably just going to have to be one, then it is considered, and the pros and cons are weighed up. For example, one year we had information on temperature, and we even supported by sending thermometers, but in the end the data wasn't really that good, so we weren't able to practically use it. But yes, if there's something specific, let us know and can be considered.
Thank you, Will.
We have time for one quick question. Does anyone have anything else want to add? Judy, did you want to ask?
Yeah, thank you, Alta. That was great. I'm interested. I come from sort of a diabetes background, and so moving into the hypertension space with the comorbidities, I just wondered if there's any role in the society for looking at comorbidities and what is done in that space.
Yeah, that is very important, Judy. You'll see also in the guidelines, we made a specific section on that. We recognize it's very important to look at comorbidities, and it's wide. It's as you mentioned, diabetes is obviously there, kidney disease as well as HIV in many regions. So it's a complicated issue, but it's very important, and it is something that if you have, for example, something specific you wish to raise with the society or an initiative or something, I think it's highly regarded and a high priority as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we'll finish there. It's been half an hour, but thank you so much, Alta, for taking the time out of your day to speak to us about the ISH, and thank you everyone for attending. So this video will be up on YouTube as well if you wanted to rewatch it again. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was nice to see everyone's faces.
So,
All right.
bye.